To know where to hide. I'm Brian Hyde. Today we're going to be talking about the aftermath of the GOP convention, which was held last week in Coeur d'Alene. It was actually a very positive thing if you're a conservative or if you are looking forward to a more conservative angle when the Idaho legislature reconvenes in January. Now, of course, we have a general election to get through, so this is not written in stone, but there also are some hard feelings on the part of the press. They feel like they weren't fully included. There's also some hard feelings on the part of certain Republicans who tend to vote more like Democrats than like Republicans. So we're going to be examining whether or not it's possible to find common ground. And we'll get to that in just a few moments.
Press club are biased all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Once again, welcome to Know Where to Hide. Twice a week, I get to sit down and go over some of the news stories, not so much with all the answers, but at least an angle that most likely isn't being covered by today's legacy media. And that's where we're going to start today, is with the legacy media feeling more than just a little bit left out from last week's GOP convention in Coeur d'Alene. Look at this headline, courtesy of Clark Corbin from the Idaho Capital Sun. Journalists barred from observing first day of Idaho Republican State Convention. GOP Chairwoman Dorothy Moon said first priorities are preserving access for Republicans, protecting privacy. Now, I understand that this is not something that's really well understood, but parties exist for the purpose of getting candidates elected. They are, in fact, private organizations. They're not funded directly by the taxpayers. They are not, part of being elected to a state office and swearing an oath to the state constitution or the U.S. Constitution. But they do have the ability to come together to determine what their bylaws, what their platform is going to be, what the rules are that will govern their party. And then they use those to their best advantage to try to get the most electable and most reliable people into office to represent them. So with that in mind, let's talk a little bit about, so why wasn't the press, given the red carpet treatment at the GOP convention? Clark Corbin says news reporters were not allowed to observe any committee meetings or events during the first day of the Idaho Republican State Convention last Thursday at Coeur d'Alene Resort. Now, the state convention takes place every 2 years. He says Republican delegates from counties all across Idaho spend 3 days voting on proposed rules, resolutions, platform changes, and finally electing the party's chairperson. News reporters may not be allowed to observe or attend any of it, which he says is a departure from allowing reporters to observe the general sessions in the past. Now, there are two things that have to be mentioned here. Number one is this was an extremely well-attended convention. In other words, it was standing room only, and there are such things as fire code. I know that it may seem like a technicality, but in that case, they do have to be aware that if you're not there as a credentialed member of the party, then the room needs to be made for those who are. Secondly, has anything changed in the way that the press's relationship with the party might be, in the last few years? Because it seems that in many cases, when you hear particularly legacy media reporters referring to someone, especially someone who is more on the conservative side of the Republican Party, there's always the qualifier, the far right, the extremist, the hard right, ultra conservative. You don't ever see that with their so-called moderate or even Democratic, elected representatives or candidates. And it seems like that's kind of a curious bit of bias that creeps into the reporting. So it's easy to understand if you understand that there's an adversarial relationship at best between many GOP candidates or party members and the press. Now, let's continue on in Clark's story. Clark tells us during an interview Thursday outside Coeur d'Alene Resort, a reporter with the Idaho Capital Sun asked Idaho Republican Party Chairwoman Dorothy Moon, when we talk about transparency, is that part of the equation at all? Yeah, not really, Moon said, laughing. Not in my mind. In my mind, this is a private group. It's a private association. By the way, she is correct about this. And no, I don't want to sit here and give you all of our platform changes or any rules or resolutions, such as our strategy on fighting ranked choice voting, because then the Democrats have that information and then they're going to try to counter us. Now, she's not just, imagining that it's something that might happen. It's not just a product of her fearful fantasizing. Moon told The Sun one of the reasons she didn't allow reporters into the convention Thursday is because of the last convention 2 years ago in Twin Falls. She didn't like the way some reporters covered the event. In Twin Falls, she said, when I ran for this position, I remember the press was back there and there were some screenshots. I don't know if you remember it. You should. It wasn't involving you, but somebody else. And they were texting information to somebody in the Democratic Party, and it wasn't good, Moon said on Thursday. So, yeah, they don't seem to understand that, there is definitely a adversarial relationship between most principled or conservative Republicans and the press. And the press can be counted on to always, give the counterpoint. Well, we always like to reach out and get the other side, which sometimes they do, but sometimes they just like to send an email or maybe leave a voice message. Well, we're going to report this story anyway, but we just thought we'd like to give you a chance to respond. And it's always in such a way that you're responding to a conclusion that we've already come to, and not so much we're trying to find the facts so that we can report it fairly. In fact, let me give you an example of how fairly the press has been reporting things. And this is more on the national level, but it should at least strike a nerve for anybody who's been paying attention. Look at this headline. Misleading GOP videos of Biden are going viral. The fact checks have trouble keeping up. The lie is sprinting the 100-meter dash, and the fact check is taking a stroll on the beach. So it's never going to catch up, said one Democratic strategist. So, in other words, all those videos that you've seen of the president, doing whatever it was he was doing at the D-Day celebration back on June 6th, or suddenly freezing and then starting to wander off. Yeah, that's all just, misrepresented videos. I think the term that White House press secretary used was something along the lines of it's a deep fake or something along those lines. Look, you're being told, you're being gaslighted. You can't believe your lying eyes. You can only believe what we tell you. And anybody who can sit there and watch Joe Biden operate and not come away with the idea that, good heavens, how is this not elder abuse? It takes willful blindness to trust that the press is telling us the truth, and it's just those GOP strategists trying to get some kind of advantage. I mean, I can understand why Democrats would be in a state of panic, right? Their front man is absolutely coming apart like a soup sandwich. What are they going to do? I don't know. But I know that for them to say, well, these are just misleading or edited videos, it's happening on live stream. How do you deny that, wow, the president just kind of lost track there and started to wander off blankly? I mean, you can tell me that he was just in awe of the fact that it was Juneteenth and the dancing had him just absolutely memorized. But, to people who've dealt with family members who have dementia, it looks like something a little bit different. So let's take it one step further. There was, this is the Mountain Express. Republicans get their full authoritarian on, and this is a concern over, okay, what's the direction now? If the Republicans are able to blunt the efforts of rhinos and the Main Street Caucus and the so-called gem state Republicans who really, really, really want to be the establishment, we deserve this. I mean, it's all the former legislators, former governors, and so forth, former attorneys general. But frankly, the public isn't having it. And so now there is panic, and this is what the Mountain Express had to say about this. Politics have gone private in Idaho. At its biannual convention, the Idaho Republican Party, which has dominated Idaho politics since the mid-1990s, banned reporters from covering its meetings, including the general session. Now, look, I think Clark Corbin did a much fairer job, but here are the histrionics of just how far people will come unhinged over this. This was different than conventions of the past. It left reporters on the outside looking in and able only to get second or third-hand reports from delegates about what had happened inside and what discussions had shaped the party's new platform. Now, you have to understand that the reporters who were there, yes, they were relegated to a hallway, which had a press area set up. They complained bitterly. It was windowless. Well, do you know who we are? We've had a few lectures on how important you are, but yes, they were very upset that the only access they had was they were allowed to interview delegates either before or after the sessions, but they were not allowed to actually be a part of those sessions unless they were there as Republicans on official business. And again, as a private entity, that is absolutely within the prerogative of the Republican Party. But back to the histrionics here. Okay, they wanted to know what happened inside, what discussions had shaped the party's new platform. The Idaho Capital Sun reported that his reporters were relegated to a windowless corner of a hallway that had been designated as a, air quotes, media area. For some reason, this reminds me of when the BLM blocked off thousands of acres of land in Bunkerville, Nevada, about 10 years ago, and designated this tiny little pig pen that they put as a free speech area. If you want to have free speech, that's where you can have it. If there had been any doubt about how the party regards the press, this editorial says this erased it. Likewise, if you had any doubts about how your federal government views the citizenry, that pig pen out there in the desert near Bunkerville probably erased any doubts about what that was all about. The news website also reported that reporters who were not registered Republicans were denied entrance to cover the party's March presidential caucuses. Again, if you were there as a Republican, there to participate, you were welcome to come in. But if you were just there to try to get the dirt, not so much. Party Chairman Dorothy Moon told reporters who tried to cover the convention that the Republican Party is a private association. And again, it is, notwithstanding their protests. No, it's not. No, it's not. You know who we are. Let us in. The party, this editorial says, is not a country club, board of directors, or a homeowners association. It is not a fraternal organization. It is not a private business. Actually, it probably is much more of that latter than not. It is an organization whose elected delegates nominate candidates for public office who run the state of Idaho. That part is true, but the tenuous connection they're trying to make here is, therefore, it is a public organization. No, it's not. It's a private organization that exists for the purpose of getting people elected to public office. Now, will those legislators make laws that affect every man, woman, and child? Yes, they do, as do those that are elected by Democrats. But the governor and others in the executive branch carry out those laws. All that is true. It still doesn't mean the Republican Party is not a private organization. But the legislature sets tax rates and allocates money for public schools and universities, highways and bridges, public health, law enforcement, prisons and housing. I mean, they're just losing it here. How can that not be a public thing? Well, I mean, these are things that have to be considered, obviously, when you are electing somebody to office. And those are very important functions of government. But this is not government functioning. It is a private organization helping to determine who to put on the ballot to represent that party. So with its convention finished, the party released its expanded platform that now includes opposition to destruction of embryos, which is part of the in vitro fertilization process that helps many people realize their dream of having children. Now, there's also questions, though, of personhood, about the destruction of fertilized embryos and so forth, but that's really not the focus of today's program. If elected officials vote this platform into law, it could endanger the procedure and have other consequences as well. I mean, this is part of the abortion hysteria. If we're not allowed to destroy human life at whatever stage, somehow, we're living in a Handmaid's Tale. The platform opposes using taxpayer funding for programs beyond high school. Now, this is really interesting. If put into law, this could put all of the costs of higher education on the backs of the students and parents. Why not? It's their choice to pursue that higher education. Why should they not have to be the ones to carry the costs? Why, it could make the state home to one of the most ignorant and least competitive populations in the world. My goodness, can you even see where we're sitting when looking down your nose at us like that? This is just ridiculous. So, yeah, the hysteria is real, and it's, how the Republicans are going to ruin everything. How are they going to ruin it? Because they're going to let people have freedom and exercise freedom and make their own choices, which actually is one of the reasons why they have made the gains that they have. People are not stupid. The public has woke up to what was done to them, especially about 4 years ago, by well-meaning public officials who nonetheless thought it was their prerogative to lock society down, ban us from meeting with our families, ban us from gathering for church, arresting mothers going to the park, arresting people for opening their businesses, for singing hymns in a church parking lot. Yeah, that kind of crap is just not proper for government. And the worst part of all was it did nothing to stop the spread of COVID. Everybody still got it no matter what. So if people remember this and wish to opt out of the kind of leadership that allowed that sort of thinking to flourish, maybe that's a little more understandable. I like Brian Almond's take on this, and Brian, I think, is one of the more thoughtful commentators out there. He is not enemy-driven in his thinking, and frankly, he's been one of the voices that's been saying, okay, I know there was some real anger and real issues, particularly on the part of people like Dan Gukin and others who were just incensed that, these party elected officials or elected leaders within the Republican Party were somehow, illegitimate. Only his vision of what the true Republican Party is. I mean, it's almost cultish kind of thinking. But Brian Almond says, look, we are the establishment now, or at least we are poised to take more control, and it's time to start acting like it. But he's saying this from the point of, where can we find common ground? Here are just a few of his thoughts. He says, we can't fall into the same trap that others before have, like the French Revolution, where their revolution just unleashed a bloodbath. In fact, historically, the American Revolution is one of those rare cases where a real revolution actually led to a real change, and somehow it didn't devolve into a bunch of infighting. So the actions of government during the 2020 pandemic, he says, woke a lot of people up to the necessity of political involvement, sparking a rebellion against the Idaho establishment. Now it's time to pivot to governing, which means building a broader coalition and passing good legislation. He is spot on here. For the Idaho GOP and conservative county committees, it means taking the lead and setting the parameters of discourse rather than only ever reacting to what other people say and do. Instead of demanding that legislators explain themselves before committees, legislators should be asking to come share their visions to the precinct committeemen. I think that's absolutely correct. Now that we're in the driver's seat, he says we have to get results. We have to prove that conservatives not only have the best policy positions, but also excel at organization and infrastructure. So he says, let's get those conservative nominees elected in November. Let's keep Ada County fully red, for instance. Let's take back territory in Boise by winning all 3 seats in District 15. That's pretty specific, but you get the picture. It's not about let's just get power and punish everybody who opposes us. What Brian is saying here is it's put up or shut up time for Idaho conservatives. We as a movement have been granted a mandate by the people. Now it's up to us to do the people's business. That means changing our strategy to accomplish our goals. The time to fight the man is over. We are the man now. We are the establishment, and it's time to unite around our shared values and go get things done. That's actually a very productive attitude. Do you not understand? He's not saying it's time to punish those who otherwise would be ruling over us. That seems to be the attitude, though, of those who did not prevail at last week's GOP convention. One of these is a very healthy attitude. One of them is not the attitude of someone who is well, mentally, emotionally, or spiritually. I trust that you can probably see the difference. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
Press Club are biased all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot.
That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy.